1. Let me tell you about this really interesting 1964 Chevy C10 I just came across on Craigslist. This is one of those finds that really catches your attention, especially if you're into classic trucks with some unique features. First off, this is a California truck that's managed to avoid the harsh Minnesota winters, which is a huge plus for preservation. What makes this C10 particularly special is its powertrain combination. It's rocking the desirable 292 inline-6 paired with a rare 3-speed manual transmission with overdrive. That overdrive feature is pretty cool. Drop the throttle at 1,800 revolutions per minute, and boom, the engine drops to around 600 revolutions per minute for better highway cruising. The truck's got 96,000 miles on the clock, and while it did get a Mach-O race spray back in '97, what's really impressive is all the mechanical work that's been done. The current owner has clearly been meticulous about maintenance. We're talking complete brake system overhaul, fuel system refresh, steering column rebuild, cooling system work, and even a cylinder head gasket replacement. Those rally wheels really set off the look of this long bed fleet-side pickup. For $22,500, you're getting a solid classic truck that's been well maintained and comes with some rare features, including that factory tack. It's not a show queen, considering the Mach-O paint job, but it's an honest worker that's been properly cared for. These C10s are getting harder to find, especially ones with this level of mechanical attention and documentation. 2. Let me tell you about this interesting 1970 Ford F250 Highboy I found on Craigslist. This is one of those honest old workhorses that's got a pretty unique history. What we've got here is a genuine factory highboy with a VIN to prove it, and its background as a Virginia DOT truck really adds some character to its story. The truck's packing a 360 V8 that was overhauled about 9 years ago, and they upgraded it from a 2-barrel to a 4-barrel carb setup at that time. It's paired with the original Borg-Warner 4-speed manual transmission, which is always a plus for these old trucks. Now let's be upfront about a few things. The odometer's not working, but it shows 26,000 miles. The seller estimates it did about that much during its DOT service, with maybe 10,000 more miles since 2012. What's really interesting about this truck is its preservation story. It spent most of its life either in sheds or covered, which explains why it's escaped the usual rust issues these old Fords often face. Recent maintenance includes a radiator wrecker, new water pump, alternator, and belts. It's wearing a wood flatbed now, which is kind of cool. This truck was actually saved from becoming a wrecker when it left DOT service. For $9,500, you're looking at a solid piece of Ford truck history. Sure, it's got its quirks like the non-working odometer, but the preserved condition and documented history make it an interesting find. These highboys are getting harder to find, especially ones that haven't been beaten to death or rusted out. 3. Let me tell you about this interesting 1983 Ford Bronco XLT I found on Craigslist. I've got to be straight with you. This one's a bit of a mixed bag, but there's definitely some potential here. Let's start with the good stuff. This Bronco's rocking a fresh 351W 5.8L crate engine with only 360 miles on it, which is a major plus. It's sitting on decent 31-inch all-terrain tires, and it's got that classic lifted stance that these Broncos wear so well. The seller's been pretty thorough with recent maintenance. We're talking new distributor, exhaust work, and a whole list of engine-related updates from mid-2023. Now let's be honest about the rough spots, because there are quite a few. The interior's showing its age with frayed carpet and a damaged dashboard. The AC is non-existent, though the heat works. The driver's window sticks, and the radio's currently not working. The rear seat's been removed, and there's no glove box. The odometer's rolled over, so the true mileage is around 118K. For $4,900, you're getting a Bronco that's mechanically sorted with that new crate engine, but needs some TLC in the comfort department. It's definitely more of a project than a finished product, but with that fresh engine and solid 4x4 system, it could be a great foundation for someone willing to put in some work. 4. Let me tell you about this 1966 Chevy pickup I found on Craigslist, but I've got to be upfront. This listing raises some red flags that we need to discuss. First, the basics. It's powered by the reliable 250 cubic inch inline-6, paired with a 3-speed manual transmission on the column, which is a classic, simple setup that these trucks are known for. The seller mentions it runs good and has new tires, which is positive. However, there are some serious concerns here. The biggest issue is the missing title. That's a major problem that could cause headaches for any potential buyer. The seller also mentions typical rust, but doesn't provide details about the extent or location of the rust damage. The description is extremely brief, which doesn't give us much confidence about the truck's true condition. For $8,000, I've got to be honest. That's a lot of money for a truck with a missing title and acknowledged rust issues, even in today's market. While these 66 Chevys are great trucks when properly sorted, this particular example seems to have some significant question marks. If you're interested in this truck, you'd absolutely need to see it in person. Thoroughly inspect the rust situation, and most importantly, have a solid plan for dealing with the title issue before even considering the purchase. These are great trucks, but this particular example might not be the one to pursue unless you're prepared for potential paperwork challenges and rust repair. 5. Let me tell you about this 1983 Dodge Ram 150 I found on Craigslist, but I've got to be pretty straightforward about this listing. The seller claims this Ram has only 27,000 original miles and drives like a brand new truck, which is a pretty bold statement for a 40-year-old vehicle. They mention some recent work including a new radiator, carburetor, exhaust and tires, which is good to hear. However, I've got to be honest, the description is extremely thin for a truck that's being called excellent. There's no mention of the engine type, no details about the body condition, interior state, or any rust issues. For a truck of this age, these are crucial details that any serious buyer would need to know. At $6,500, negotiable, this could either be a hidden gem or a case of too good to be true. The super low mileage claim would need solid documentation to be believable, given the age of the truck. These early Ram trucks can be great vehicles, but without more detailed information about its condition and history, it's hard to make a solid judgment. If you're interested in this Ram, you'd absolutely want to see it in person, verify that mileage claim, and get a much more detailed look at its overall condition. Remember, even a low-mileage truck from 1983 is still a 40-year-old vehicle that could have age-related issues, regardless of how little it was driven. 6. Let me tell you about a pretty special find on Craigslist. A 1977 Chevy Silverado 50th Anniversary Edition. This isn't your average 77 Silverado, and there's some interesting history here. What makes this truck particularly noteworthy is that it's been in the same family since new, with only 2 owners, both family members. That's the kind of provenance you don't often find with these old trucks. It's showing 83,000 original miles, which seems believable given its history. Under the hood, you've got the reliable 350 CV8 with a quadrajet carb, which is a solid powertrain combo for these trucks. The seller mentions it runs great and has never been in any accidents, which is always good to hear. Being a 50th Anniversary Edition, it's got that distinctive yellow molding strip that was unique to this model year. Now, let's be honest about a few things. There is some damage to the molding, but importantly, the seller has OEM factory replacements ready to go. That's actually a pretty big deal because finding original parts for these special editions isn't easy. At $24,500, this is definitely priced at the higher end of the market. However, considering it's a documented family-owned special edition with relatively low miles and original documentation, the price isn't completely out of line with what these anniversary models can command when well preserved. 7. Let me tell you about this interesting 1984 Chevrolet K5 Blazer I found on Craigslist that's got quite a story to tell. This K5 started life as a diesel, but has undergone a pretty significant transformation with a 454 big block swap. That's a serious power upgrade from the original 6.2L diesel these came with. The sellers put some real work into the suspension with a professional 6-inch lift installation, new body bushings, leaf springs, and shocks. Now let's be honest about both the good and the challenging parts. On the positive side, they've addressed several common K5 issues with new door panels, window regulators, tailgate motor, and master cylinder. The truck's running strong and comes with black rims and tires. However, there are some things you need to know. There's no working heat or AC, which is something to consider depending on where you live. Also, anytime you're looking at a vehicle with an engine swap, you'll want to thoroughly check how well the conversion was done. For $11,000, you're getting a K5 that's been built more for capability than comfort. The 454 swap and professional lift setup are definitely the main selling points here. These K5s are becoming increasingly popular, and finding one with a big block that's already lifted could save you some serious modification money. 8. Let me tell you about this 1966 Chevrolet El Camino I found on Craigslist, but I need to be pretty straightforward about this listing. The seller's description is remarkably thin for a classic vehicle, which raises some concerns. While they claim it runs, drives, and stops, and has a straight, rust-free body with relatively recent paint, there are several red flags we need to discuss. First, it's been sitting for several years, which is never great for any vehicle. The seller recommends bringing a trailer or using a flatbed service, which suggests they're not confident about its roadworthiness, despite saying it runs and drives. There's also no mention of the engine type, transmission condition, interior state, or any mechanical details. At $7,750 firm, this is a tricky one to evaluate. While 66 El Caminos are desirable classics, and a rust-free straight body is valuable, there's just too much we don't know. The fact that it needs to be transported rather than driven home suggests some significant work might be needed to make it roadworthy again. If you're interested in this El Camino, you'd absolutely need to do a thorough in-person inspection. Be prepared for potential issues that come with long-term storage, fuel system problems, seized components, deteriorated rubber parts, and other age-related issues. This could be a decent project base, but don't expect to just gas it up and drive it home. 9. Let me tell you about an interesting barn find, 1965 Chevy C10 I just spotted on Craigslist, and I'll be straight with you about what we're looking at here. This is a genuine time capsule that's been sitting for 15 years, and it's got some interesting potential. It's powered by the straight-six P235 engine, paired with a 3-speed manual transmission with column shift, a classic, simple setup that these trucks are known for. The odometer shows 51,000 miles, though after all these years that might be hard to verify. Now let's be completely honest about what you're getting into. This is definitely a project truck, not a driver. While it turns over and shows signs of life when fuel is added directly to the carb, you're looking at all the typical issues that come with a vehicle that's been sitting for 15 years. Likely needs full fuel system work, brakes, rubber components, and various other systems checked and restored. On the positive side, the seller mentions the interior is clean and straight, with no rips in the seat, which is pretty remarkable for a barn find. The wheels are period correct, which is always nice to see. At $6,500, you need to know what you're getting into. There's also a lien on the title, which is something you'd need to sort out before purchase. This isn't a truck you're going to drive home. It's a restoration project that needs a complete going through. 10. Let me tell you about this interesting 1970 GMC C2500 I found on Craigslist, and there's quite a bit to unpack here. This 3-4-ton long bed has had some serious mechanical upgrades that really bring it into the modern era. The sellers invested in some meaningful improvements over the past 3 years, including a Holley Sniper EFI system, which is a huge upgrade from the original carb setup, a rebuilt 700 R4 transmission with overdrive, not the original transmission but a great upgrade for modern driving, and a complete rewiring job with a modern fuse box and 100-amp alternator. They've also upgraded to front disc brakes, added a new chrome steering column, and installed a new tack with chrome instrument bezel. Now let's be honest about the whole picture. This truck started life as a farm truck, and it shows. The seller's straight up about it needing bodywork, so you'll need to factor that into your plans. The odometer was replaced because the original wasn't working, so the true mileage is unknown. At $15,000, you're paying for the mechanical upgrades more than the cosmetics. Those upgrades aren't cheap. The Sniper EFI system alone is a significant investment, and the transmission rebuild and electrical upgrades represent serious money spent. This could be a great platform if you're looking for a mechanically sorted truck that you can gradually restore cosmetically. The modern upgrades make it more reliable and drivable than a stock example, but you'll need to be okay with the farm truck aesthetics or be ready to invest in bodywork. If you're looking for a show truck, this isn't it, at least not yet. But if you want a solid work truck with modern conveniences, this could be worth checking out. 11. Let me tell you about this 1983 Chevy C30 dually I found on Craigslist, and I've got to appreciate the seller's honesty about this one. This is definitely a project truck, but it's got some interesting potential. Under the hood, you've got the mighty 454 big block paired with a 400 transmission, and it's got some nice touches like the dual exhaust with an X-pipe setup. It's been lowered with Bell-Tech spindles and shackles, sitting on polished 16 inches Eagle blades with newer tires, and has some chrome accents with the bar grille and sway bars. Now let's be real about the condition. The seller's refreshingly upfront about its issues. The paint looks decent in photos, but apparently needs a complete redo. There's body damage including dents and dings, the driver's side dually fender needs fiberglass work or replacement, and the windshield is cracked. The interior is described as decent-ish, with no headliner. The good news, it's a California truck with reportedly solid rockers and floors with zero rot, which is a big deal for these old trucks. It starts, moves, and stops, though it's been sitting for a while. It's currently on non-op status, so at least there are no back fees to deal with at the DMV. At $6,500, you're buying potential here, not perfection. This could be a great foundation for a custom build. The big block power, lowered stance, and solid California body give you something to work with. But don't kid yourself, this is going to need significant work to get it where you want it. 12. Let me tell you about this 1983 Ford F-250 I found on Craigslist, and there's some interesting history here that we need to discuss. This is a single-owner farm truck from the past 40 years, which is pretty remarkable. The seller's been upfront about the mileage. It's actually 123,000 miles, not the 23,000 shown on the odometer. They've got detailed maintenance records from 1985 to 2013, which is the kind of documentation you rarely see on these old workhorses. Recent work includes new front brakes and calipers, and they've added a new bedliner. The body is claimed to be rust-free, though they do mention surface rust on the undercarriage, which is pretty typical for a 40-year-old truck. They've only put about 300 miles on it since acquiring it. Now, let's talk about that $19,000 price tag. That's ambitious for an 83 F-250, even with the documented history. While single-owner trucks with maintenance records are valuable, this is still a 40-year-old farm truck with rolled-over mileage. The seller is offering financing options and seems open to trades, which might explain the higher asking price. If you're interested, you'll want to thoroughly inspect that undercarriage rust they mentioned and verify all the documentation. These F-250s are solid trucks, but at this price point, you'll want to make sure everything checks out. The single-owner history and maintenance records are definitely valuable, but make sure you're comfortable with the price relative to the market. 13. Let me be completely straight with you about this 1978 Ford F-100 I found on Craigslist, because this one's definitely going to need some work. The seller's being upfront by labeling this as a project truck in all caps, and they're not kidding. This F-100 hasn't run in over a decade, which means you're looking at all the typical issues that come with long-term storage. It's got the straight-six engine paired with a 4-speed manual transmission, which is actually a pretty solid, simple combination when running. The truck's showing 150,000 miles on the odometer, but after sitting for 10+ years, that's probably the least of your concerns. The description is extremely bare bones, which usually isn't a great sign. They do emphasize having a clean title and pink slip in hand, which is at least one positive point. At $5,200, you need to go into this with your eyes wide open. Any vehicle that's been sitting for 10+ years is going to need significant work just to get running again. We're talking fuel system, brakes, all rubber components, fluids, and likely much more. You're essentially buying a project that will need a complete mechanical recommissioning at minimum. If you're mechanically inclined and looking for a classic Ford truck project, this could be a starting point, but make sure to negotiate that price considering the amount of work ahead. These old Fords are great trucks when sorted, but this one's got a long way to go before it's back on the road. 14. Let me tell you about this 1972 Chevrolet C20 I found on Craigslist, and I'll be straight with you about both its strengths and weaknesses. This 3/4-ton pickup's got some solid mechanical specs. It's running a 350 Sci V8 with a 4-barrel carb, paired with the bulletproof Muncie SM465 manual transmission. That transmission is known for being nearly indestructible, and it's got a fresh clutch with less than 5,000 miles on it. The Dana 60 rear end with 4.10 gears is a heavy-duty setup that's great for hauling. Now let's talk about the challenges. This truck has a salvage title, which is a significant detail that affects both value and potential resale. There's also some serious rust issues that need addressing. We're talking floor pans, rockers, and the passenger side cab corner. These aren't minor rust spots. They're structural areas that'll need proper repair. On the positive side, it's got some nice updates. Recent dual exhaust with Flowmaster mufflers, heavy-duty battery cables, fresh upholstery, a Pioneer stereo, and Alcoa-style aluminum wheels. All the essential systems work: heat, wipers, horn, and lights, though it does need rear wheel cylinders replaced. At $4,500, or best offer, you need to weigh the good against the bad. The mechanical setup is solid, but you're looking at some serious bodywork to address that rust, and the salvage title will always be a factor. If you're mechanically inclined and can handle some welding work, or if you're looking for a solid work truck and aren't concerned about cosmetics, this could be worth considering. 15. Let me tell you about this 1976 Ford Highboy F250 I found on Craigslist. And there's an interesting story here. This is a real deal highboy with some serious muscle under the hood. We're talking about a 390 V8, which is a torque monster when properly sorted. The good news is that the engine, transmission, and rear end, which has a Posey traction differential, have all been rebuilt. This truck has some genuine history as a work truck and mud bogger, which tells you it's been used as Ford intended. Now let's be honest about the condition. The seller's refreshingly upfront. This truck's been sitting for 5 years, though they've done some basic recommissioning work, including fluid changes, a new battery, and new wheels and tires. They're also straight up about the body condition. It's got rust and dents, which isn't surprising given its working history. At $5,500, you're buying a piece of Ford truck history that needs some TLC. The seller makes no pretenses about it being a show truck. It's a worker with battle scars. However, having rebuilt drivetrain components is a significant plus, especially with these old workhorses. If you're looking for a classic highboy with good bones and don't mind some cosmetic roughness, this could be worth checking out. These trucks are getting harder to find, especially with rebuilt mechanicals. Just remember you're getting a project that needs work, not a restored truck. But with that 390 auto combination and working 4x4, you've got the makings of a solid foundation for either restoration or just a cool old work truck. 16. Let me tell you about this seriously well-maintained 1985 Ford F250 I found on Craigslist, and there's a lot to unpack here. This is a 460 powered beast that's 7.5 liters of Ford Big Block, paired with a 4-speed manual transmission, showing just 73,600 miles. What makes this truck special is the level of maintenance and upgrades the owner has invested in it. Let's break down the impressive list of recent work. They've basically rebuilt the entire fuel system with an Edelbrock 4-barrel carb, dual in-tank fuel pumps, new sending units, and frame-mounted boosters. The cooling system is all new. Water pump, hoses, radiator, thermostat, the works. They've added Bilstein overload shocks in the rear, a new steering stabilizer, and a 120-amp alternator. For hauling, it's set up with both a Class 5 frame-mounted hitch, 18,000 pounds capacity, and fifth-wheel mounts in the bed. You've got dual fuel tanks, working AC, and modern conveniences like a Bluetooth stereo system. At $5,800, this actually seems like a pretty solid deal for what you're getting. The owner appears to be meticulous about maintenance, using full synthetic oil, and has addressed many of the common issues these trucks develop. The extensive list of new parts and upgrades suggests this wasn't just maintained but improved. 17. Let me tell you about this 1967 Chevrolet El Camino I found on Craigslist. But this isn't your typical classic El Camino. This is basically a race car with a bed. Let's talk about what makes this thing special. It's running a serious 420 cubic inch small block built on a dart block, which is premium racing hardware. The transmission is a G-Force G 101 4-speed with a long shifter. That's a serious piece of racing equipment, not your typical Muncie or T10. Out back, there's a built 12-bolt with aggressive 4.88 gears and a spool, meaning no differential. Both wheels turn at the same speed, plus 33 spline axles for strength. The Avance single disc clutch rounds out what's clearly a purpose-built drivetrain. Now let's be honest about what we're looking at here. This isn't a cruiser or a daily driver. This is a purpose-built race car. The odometer's broken and shows 150,000 miles. But with this setup, that's pretty much irrelevant. The spool rear end means it's not going to be fun or practical on the street, and those 4.88 gears are meant for the strip, not highway cruising. At $20,000, you're paying for the racing hardware more than the El Camino itself. That dart block, G-force transmission, and built rear end represent serious money in parts alone. However, potential buyers need to understand what they're getting. This is a race vehicle that happens to be in an El Camino body, not a restored classic car. 18. Let me tell you about this 1966 GMC pickup I found on Craigslist. And there's some interesting stuff to unpack here. This long bed pickup is powered by the 305 V6 with a 2-barrel carb rated at 150 GP and 260 lb-ft of torque. Not a powerhouse by today's standards, but a reliable workhorse in its day. It's paired with a 4-speed manual transmission, and the seller's been pretty detailed about recent work. Let's talk about the investment that's gone into this truck. The sellers documented about $5,117 in recent repairs and upgrades, including a rebuilt transmission, $2,200, rebuilt carb, new tires, brakes, and a complete clutch job with all new components. They claim it runs well with no knocking and doesn't leak oil or water, which is pretty good for a truck this age. Now here's where it gets interesting. They're asking $3,300 for a truck they've put over $5,000 into. The truck's currently on non-op registration, so you'll need to sort that out. The condition is listed as fair, which suggests there might be some cosmetic issues they haven't detailed in the description. At $3,300, you're getting a classic GMC with a lot of fresh mechanical work for less than what was just invested in it. The 305 V6 isn't the most sought-after engine, but it's a solid, simple power plant. If the body and frame are solid, which you definitely want to verify, this could be a pretty decent deal for someone looking for a classic truck project that's already had major mechanical work done. 19. Let me be completely straight with you about this 1985 Ford F350 I found on Craigslist, because this listing needs some real talk. This is being sold as a parts truck only, which is crucial to understand right off the bat. We're looking at a crew cab dually with the 6.9L IDI diesel and automatic transmission, and while it's complete, meaning no parts have been stripped, it's clearly not in running condition. The truck's showing 175,000 miles, but with a broken and rolled over odometer, that number is pretty much meaningless at this point. The seller's being upfront about this being strictly a parts vehicle, which is actually refreshing in its honesty. At $3,500 for a parts truck, you need to evaluate this based on what you can use from it. The 6.9L IDI diesel engines, while not as popular as the later 7.3L, still have value when complete. The crew cab body panels, if they're salvageable, could be valuable as these trucks are getting harder to find. The dually setup also has some parts value. However, this isn't a restoration candidate. It's being sold explicitly for parts. If you're working on another 80s F350 and need a donor vehicle, or if you're a parts reseller who knows the market for these components, this might be worth looking at. Just remember, you're buying a parts vehicle, not a project truck, and you'll need to factor in transportation costs since it's likely not drivable. 20. Let me tell you about this really interesting 1964 Chevy C10 I found on Craigslist, and there's a lot to unpack here. This is a California-born long bed fleet side that's got some pretty special features. Under the hood, you've got the desirable 292 inline-six, but what makes this truck particularly unique is its rare 3-speed manual transmission with overdrive. That overdrive feature is pretty cool. When you hit about 1,800 revolutions per minute and back off the throttle, it drops the engine speed to around 600 revolutions per minute for better highway cruising. It even has a rare working factory tach, which is a really nice touch. The seller's been incredibly detailed about the mechanical work done, and it's extensive. We're talking complete brake system overhaul, full fuel system refresh, steering column rebuild, cooling system work, and a cylinder head gasket replacement. They've even addressed the little things like wiper blades and spark plugs. The truck's showing 96 Tex-6 miles and wears desirable rally wheels. Now, let's be honest about the cosmetics. It did get a Mako respray back in '97, so we're not talking show-quality paint here. However, being a California truck until '95 and never seeing Minnesota winters is a huge plus for body preservation. At $22,500, you're paying for the rare drivetrain configuration, California provenance, and all the mechanical sorting that's been done. These C10s are getting harder to find, especially ones with documented maintenance and desirable options, like the 292 3-speed overdrive combo.